So this is the first forum of our 2016-2017 Cleveland Catholic Public Policy Series. We have brochures in the back, flyers for all of the programming that's going on this year. Thank you, as always, to the Institute of Catholic Studies Department, led by Dr. Paul Murphy, who has supported our efforts for this programming since day one. Also thanks to Mary Beth Brooks and her assistant, Sam Wynandy, who handled so many of the logistics for these programs. Tonight we have a distinguished panel who will be discussing nothing less than the future of Catholic Northeast Ohio. Our moderator is Father Robert Begin. Bob has been a priest since 1964. He was suspended for 2 years in the late 1960s and early 1970s as a result of his work with the Vietnam anti-war movement. He received his law degree in the 1970s and has worked with the homeless and with immigration and with various social action projects for over 45 years. Finally, he was pastor of St. Coleman's from 2007 until recently when he retired. Also on our panel is Deacon Louis M. Primozic. Is that right? Deacon Primozic was ordained as a permanent deacon in 2005. He's founder and president CEO of Orion Solutions, who specializes in management consulting, strategic planning, change management, succession planning, and human capital development. Deacon Primozic has consulted to bishops and numerous religious organizations, from parishes to mergers of women's religious communities and the seminary study of the Diocese of Cleveland in the 1980s. He's been married to his wife, Antoinette, since 1978, and they have 2 adult children. Also on our panel is Sister Katherine Feely, SND, who serves as the director of the Center for Service and Social Action at John Carroll University. Before coming to John Carroll, she spent 2 years developing and launching a national program for adults on Catholic social teaching, biblical justice, and discipleship as the director of the Good News People program at Just Faith Ministries. Prior to that, she was the director of the Education for Justice project at the Center for Concern in Washington, D.C., a Jesuit research center and think tank. She holds a B.S. in Accounting and Economics from Villanova and an M.A. in Theology from Boston College. Combining joint studies in social ethics and economics, her background includes work in the areas of theology, social justice and advocacy, faith formation, and pastoral programming. Here's Father Bob Begin.
Is this working? Yes. Oh, that's good. I actually wrote out what I'm going to say because otherwise I digress a lot and I only have 20 minutes. Otherwise, we'll all be leaving before we're finished. What happened a year ago, October, is I got in the mail a packet which came from the Center of Applied Research for the Apostolate. There's an organization that was created by the American Bishops Conference, the United States Bishops Conference, because the church document, The Church in the Modern World from the Second Vatican Council, actually instructed the bishops so that they would use applied research sciences in the planning process to meet the needs of their people. Applied research means all the statistics. Okay? And so we got all these statistics from them and in the mail, and then there was an all-day conference of all the priests of the diocese, and these were pretty much explained to us. And the bottom line is that there's going to be a lot less priests. I think we all figured that out without studying it. But they know how old they're going to be and how many are going to retire, and they know everything about what it is so that they can do a real projection. And the projection goes in over 30 years, so the first 10 years, then 20 years, then 30 years. So right now, if you just take the priests under the age of 75, which would not include me, there were 285 in October of 2015, and they project there will be 188 in 2025. So if you were running an organization that knew that your human resources were going to be depleted that much in 10 years, what would you do? That means it's a difference of 97 priests. Then between 2025 and 2035, you lose 35 more priests and go down to 153. This is for an 8-county diocese. Okay. How many parishes do we have?
187.
187 parishes. So now we have 153 priests to serve 187 parishes. And then it pretty much levels off. If you include the retired priests, many of whom are active, at least part-time, but there's always problems with aging, problems with health, problems with people living part-time in Florida. There are more priests, okay? There were actually, instead of 285, the number would go up to 386. And that would be reduced only by, instead of 97 less priests, if you include those over 75, it would be 76 less priests. And the sum total would be, you would get down to like 201 priests in 2045 instead of 157. So that information was given to us, and I went to this priest meeting because I really wanted to say something. But the problem is when I say something at a priest meeting, everybody goes, uh-oh. So instead, I went on the website of this Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate to see if they had any recommendations on how these statistics should be used in pastoral planning. And they did. There was a whole paragraph there that said, do not use these only. Do not use only these statistics in your planning. And they quoted Edward Schillebeck saying, the sociological report cannot take the place of pastoral decision-making. It supplies only one piece that the pastor has to find a place for in a jigsaw puzzle of his pastoral enterprise. So it's really just one piece. But the danger is, as you all know, if your parish were having less money or less staff or whatever, the danger is that people say, well, we can pay our staff less, or we can have our staff work less hours. And people immediately begin to think of what we can cut out so that we can operate at some level as an institution when the depletion happens. So when I left the conference, I said to myself, if I were in a leadership position in the diocese, what I would do is I would commission a strategic plan, like immediately. And I would consult for this plan as many stakeholders as possible. So I would want to be in touch with parishioners and priests and deacons and religious communities of women and men, organizations, healthcare organizations, social services. Get the feeding from everybody, from the students, from teachers in our schools. Bring it as much as we can of what people think we should do as we're faced with this reality. And my reflection and what I was afraid of was that we might go with an easy fix. Can you hear me back there? Yes? Okay. Sometimes I mumble. And the easy fix would be to use only the statistical information and try to make a pastoral decision as a result of that. So it would be very easy for an administrator to get out a map, look at where all the Catholics really live, and say where we're going to put our personnel and where we're going to pull personnel out of because no Catholics really live there anymore, or because they can't pay their bills, or because of whatever. And then we would downsize to something that's affordable, manageable, smaller, focused on keeping the active Catholic population comfortable by maintaining their sacramental services, their social services, educating their children, providing evangelization opportunities, and then collecting money to support the institution and Catholic charities and the needs of missionaries and relief activity. And that would be what our new church would look like. It probably would be people all over 50. And it probably would continue to get smaller, is what I would guess. The number of parishes would be limited. We'd be answering the question, how do we best use diminishing resources to ensure the continued existence of the institution? I think that's the question we'd be answering by this easy fix. The number of parishes would be limited in this scenario. In this diocese, the bishop wants a priest in every parish, so we can only have as many pastors as parishes as we have pastors that would be available. And we would be convinced that we're doing this is the best we can do. This is all the priests we have, and we are recruiting more intensely, trying to get more priests, and we're importing some priests from other countries. And if we can get more priests, we will, but this is as much as we can do. So in that scenario, we say, well, suppose we did that. What have we done? And what have we left behind? What have we lost? So what we've done is we've disinvested our inner city neighborhoods in our Catholic presence, along with the banks and the shopping centers and everybody else who just walked away from neighborhoods in the city, and we walk away with them. And the inner ring suburbs as well. Some of you are from, you know what's going on. So in our inner city suburb, inner ring suburbs where there are fewer Catholics, little money, hard to maintain, we have some architectural wonders, buildings. St. Michael's, St. Stephen's, St. Coleman, St. James, St. Ignatius, St. Stanislaus is an incredible church, St. Aloysius. Can we walk away from those and just leave all that heritage? That's something to think about. But they also have a lot of minority groups, new immigrants, single-parent families, families with members in prison, delinquent youth, poor schools, drug abuse, crime, lack of transportation, few opportunities. We're just saying, my friend Charles Murray used to say, being poor is getting to the point where you just don't have any options anymore. No options. And the fewer options you have, the poorer you are. So that's what we would have participated in. That's what we would have done if we just used the statistics and made some changes to accommodate the Catholic population of the diocese. And that's a real danger. And there are dioceses that have done just that. And it certainly hasn't made everyone happy. Then what do we leave behind? Well, what we leave behind is our essence of who we are as church. We left behind the mission and the vision that Jesus gave us. The vision of Jesus was announced at the Last Supper, pretty much in St. John's Gospel, where he said what he wants. He said, I want that all be one, that they all may be one as you, Father, are in me, and as I am in you, that they also may be one in us. One loving human family. This is the vision of Jesus. Almost as if he were, here we go, digressing, coming in from Mars, okay, and looking at the earth with all of its resources and looking at the people and saying, why don't you people love each other? You would be so happy, and there's plenty there for everybody. Why don't you act like one loving family? This is his vision. In his mission, he announced his mission, his own personal mission, in Luke's Gospel, quoting from the prophet Isaiah, saying, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, he has anointed me, he has sent me to bring good news to the poor, to the people without options. This is my mission. And he didn't do it as someone helping them from above, or he did it by becoming one of them. So much one of them that it didn't take two thoughts or anything to think about, let's crucify him. He's just like all these other people that are a problem to us. So he becomes one of the poor, he identifies with them, he works with them. He's criticized for eating and drinking with sinners, and he doesn't judge anyone. Kind of like this new Pope we have, which is really just a breath of fresh air. I was here last year, and pretty much what I talked about. In John the 23rd, we had that same kind of Pope back in the 50s and beginning of the 60s. And now, 50 years later, we have another Pope. And in that interim, a lot of things happened, but that's a real breath of fresh air to come back into what is the mission? What is the mission? What is the vision? Because if we lose the vision, then we're just another institution. And who knows how much of the mission will ever be accomplished. So the idea is that in pastoral planning, you can't just think of the numbers and you can't just run it like a business. We are on a mission from God, and on the mission from God, we are supposed to be bringing good news to the poor. And if you look at Pope Benedict, the last letter he wrote, the Caritate and Veritate, the whole letter about love, about charity and truth. You look at Pope Francis, the joy of the gospel, he goes through the gospels, and Francis writes, I think at a 6th grade level, so everybody can read what he writes. It is just so beautiful. And then proclaim the year of mercy last November. The year of mercy ends November 20th of this year. And in that year of mercy, in that proclamation, he talks about the works of mercy. When we were young, we had to memorize these things from our catechism, but the corporal works of mercy have to do with physical needs of people. Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, visit the sick, visit those who are in prison. Part of what Jesus talked about when he described the end of the world and said, I was hungry and you gave me to eat, I was thirsty, you gave me a drink. People say, we never saw you hungry. Whenever you did it to my least brothers or sisters, whatever you did for the poor, you were doing that for me. Come into the kingdom. It was prepared for you from the beginning of the world. Those are the corporal works of mercy. You can measure some of those and say this is how many meals we served and this is what we did. The spiritual works of mercy are hard to measure. They have to do with counseling the doubtful, instructing the ignorant, or correcting those who are in error, bearing wrongs patiently. So you can't bear wrongs like Donald Trump, at least the candidate. I don't know if the president's going to be the same way, but when he gets wronged, you've got to wrong somebody back. Bear wrongs patiently. Forgive offenses willingly. Comfort the sorrowing. Sometimes you can't do anything else except be with them. You ever go to a wake, and on the way to the wake, your friend, somebody, your friend's friend died, or your friend's relative died, and all the way there you say, what am I going to say when I get there? And when you get there, there aren't any words. What do? You have this big hug, and that's a sacrament. It's an external sign of internal grace, and something beautiful is happening. It's comforting and sorrowful, being there with people and for people when they need you. And we need to think of our cities that way. The presence is really important. Praying for the living and the dead. Okay, these are hard to measure, but these are the heart of what it means to be the compassionate heart of Christ in our city. This is our mission. The easy fix, the first solution, leaves us isolated, separated sociologically and socially, geographically, economically, spiritually, separated by class, by culture, from the very people to whom we are sent to bring salvation and good news and divine life. So we are left with Catholic communities, very good people who have no vehicle or easy way to be in touch with the very people, the poor, the afflicted, anybody, the very people we are sent by Christ to be with, to share their joy, to share their hopes, to share their grief, share their anxieties. And the Church in the Modern World, the crowning document of the Vatican Council, if we're thinking with the Church and not just with Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, the Church in the Modern World happened that way. Okay? After they talked about the priests and the laity and the Church and the sacraments and all of the things about the Church, all the bishops of the world gathered for all those days. One of the cardinals stood up, I think it was Cardinal Sunens from Belgium, said, we haven't talked about the problems of the people. And so they developed a document that wasn't on the agenda called the Church in the Modern World, and had all the bishops voted for it. It was unanimous after it was finally worded. But it says, it starts out by saying, it's just so simple, the joy and hope, the grief and anxiety of the people of this generation, especially the poor and those who are afflicted in any way, are the joys and hopes the grief and the anxiety of the followers of Christ. So empathy. Their suffering is our suffering. Their suffering is Christ's suffering. So it's not just through sacraments and prayer and spiritual practices that the church fulfills its mission to bring divine life or salvation or good news to the poor. If you read down in that document, The Church in the Modern World, there's some beautiful things in there. There's one paragraph that kind of summarizes, though. It says that the church reflects salvation, or the light of divine life, through her work of restoring and enhancing the dignity of the human person. So think about Mount Pleasant, where we have no churches left, a Kinsman or Union, or we have the Theo Bowman Center there, and that's it. Enhancing the dignity of the human person, strengthening the fabric of human society. The kind of social fabric is in these neighborhoods where the majority of the people are renting homes and we are having a lot of problems. Enriching the daily activity of people with deeper meaning and importance of their daily activity. The church believes that in this way she can make a great contribution, not through priests. The church believes that in this way she can make a great contribution through individual members and the community as a whole toward bringing a greater humanity to the human family and its history, creating one loving human family, the vision of Jesus. So our disinvestment in the neediest areas of the city and rural areas, and the first easy fix scenario, is in direct contradiction to our mission. So if we did what we said we were going to do in the beginning, we would be not doing our mission, we would not be doing what the global church has asked us to do when all the bishops of the world came together. It's a scenario that would make the direction of that Vatican Council an almost impossible mission. What's the better way? Well, the better way in a more pastoral strategic plan, I think, would begin with the vision of Jesus. He established a church so that we all might be one human family, without distinguishing between no slave or free, no man or woman. We're all part of one loving family, and the needs of others are always more important than my wants. And then the mission that he gave us when he left the earth. In one of his last appearances, he said, "As the Father sent me to bring good news to the poor, I am now sending you. I will be with you all days until the end of the world." So this is the context that we need, where Dr. Schilbeck said that we can fit these statistics into the jigsaw puzzle. Okay, but the jigsaw puzzle must be directed, and when it's all finished, it will be the vision. The mission and the vision must be the context for how we solve the problem that we're facing with fewer priests. So what about the what about in the second pastoral scenario? Our most treasured assets now are not going to be the churches in Avon or University Heights, or our most treasured churches are going to be the ones that in the first scenario were the ones who were least valuable, the ones we probably would have closed. This is where we have the trust of the people who were most disadvantaged. Constant interaction with the neighborhood, where we enrich the daily activity of the people with deeper meaning and importance. This is where we strengthen the fabric of human society and restore the dignity of the human person. In our methodology, we'll create vehicles and institutional structures that will make the more fortunate in our Catholic community, our ecumenical and interfaith communities, to be in direct relationship with the disadvantaged. We create relationships like we did with Church in the City, between the parishes, but in a much more intentional way, in a way where we actually are going to one another's churches and rubbing shoulders with each other, celebrating feast days together, perhaps having one administrator that would take care of all of the accounting and bookkeeping, things like that for the different parishes. And then we plan to allocate resources, that any plan to reallocate resources I didn't write this, did I? Any plan to reallocate resources, oh, here it is, needs to relate to the suburban church, where the greatest number of active parishioners are. To the parish, those suburban people need then to be related, to be in relationship with the people who have the greatest need. Because if we're sent to bring good news to the poor, that's the purpose of the church in Avon, that's the purpose of the church in Pepper Pike, is to bring good news to the poor, just like it's the mission of the Church of St. Aloysius, of the Church of St. Augustine's. It's the mission of the church, and all of the members of the church. And you know what? My experience is that people in our suburban parishes, young people, old people, they're searching for ways to put their faith into practice. They would love to have some options on the screen about what they can do with their friends and how they can get out and do things. And students would love to do things. So I think if we give people a way to help people develop their own ways of putting their faith into practice and develop that kind of leadership, it'll be very interesting. So then we have empowerment and self-sufficiency ministries, we have advocacy to change the systems that make it impossible for people to get out of poverty, and people bring their time, their talent, their treasure that they are using to lift up the poor. They bring that to Mass and they offer that with the bread and wine to God. It's given back to them as food for strength, and the people nurture each other to go out and continue doing the mission. And it's what Francis calls the missionary church. The missionary church doesn't have to worry about the institution failing, because the missionary church will keep its institution going because it needs its institution, and the institution will thrive. It needs the institution to support these ministries and the way that they are coordinated. Another way to think out of the box, I think, would be to think about leadership training and laity. If there aren't any priests, well, we don't need priests to do most of these things, right? Maybe the priest could do some leadership training or some formation or motivation or help people get organized to do things, but we don't really need a priest to do that either, but he may be especially equipped to do that. Most of the things that priests do that I do, you don't have to be a priest to do. I love doing them, and I'll probably keep doing them. But we can all do these things, and we don't need to wait. There was an older nun, Sister Luke Tobin. Did you ever meet Sister Luke Tobin? She was giving a talk. She was older than I am now, I'm sure. Giving a talk at St. Joe's, the Mother House on Rocky River Drive, and she said, the church is very old, and the church is very large, and if it moves at all, it's going to move very slowly. Don't wait. I just pictured this big blob, this church, and my God, if it moves at all, it's going to move very slowly. I think that if we encourage people in this mission activity, share their vision, we work with them to provide vehicles for establishing loving relationships across the lines that now separate us, these people will strengthen and help reform the institution, and it will grow. It'll be less manageable at first. It'll appear to be less organized. It certainly will not develop uniform patterns. Like we want everybody to say the same prayers in the same manner in every church. But it will be a spirit-filled, inviting, welcoming. It'll be powerful. Because power, and most of all the power of the Spirit, always comes from relationships. We can create the relationships, power will be there. If the power is there to serve and we use it to serve, the power will grow. We can think out of the box again about training and formation. Lay leadership form a new center for the church in the modern world will result in shared decision-making and responsibility. Leadership that will find its expression in our worship led by priests and sacraments, where we offer our service as a gift to God, and we are fortified and nurtured for the mission. So that's a different way of looking at solving the problem of not having enough priests. It's by saying, that's not a problem. It really isn't. It really isn't a problem. Because you know what? As these things begin to happen, people are going to want to be priests. If I could go into Central Catholic with Father Mark DiNardo at St. Pat's and Father Joe McNulty at St. Augustine's and my brother Dan and some priests that are working in the inner city, and talk to the young men and women there about the importance of working in the church and the importance of something like this. And then give them some stories of the people that we've been able to help and the ways that things have improved in the neighborhood. And Father Jim O'Donnell, where the whole neighborhood has improved. And say, this is an exciting ministry that you're being invited to. We would get people. We'd get them from low, middle income. They would come, they would love to do this. Because they know what the suffering is personally, many of them. But the problem is, if the vocation literature that the diocese is using right now, it's all about sacraments. About going and anointing somebody when they're sick, about hearing confessions, about celebrating Mass, about teaching religion. There's nothing about bringing good news to the poor. There's nothing about rebuilding our cities. There's nothing about dignity of the human person and the social fabric of the community. And it's not there. It's not there because priests aren't trained to do it, don't know how to do it. You do. You do. University students know how to do this. People know how to do this. They want to do this. We just need to give the freedom to create the vehicles to do that. So after I attended that conference a year ago, I had planned to do an op-ed and probably get expelled again from the church. And I wanted to do something to say we need a strategic plan. And then I got this letter in the mail from Primozic that said that he was going to be at the district meeting in the far west side, and he wanted to hear from priests about what we think we ought to do about the priest shortage. And I said, oh my God, somebody's already working on this. Somebody's collecting information for a strategic plan. And I went to the meeting, and it was a great meeting. It was beautiful. Louis volunteered his professional assistance to the bishop. The bishop has graciously accepted this. And so I immediately asked him to do this presentation with me so you can get an idea what he's doing, why he's doing it, and where we might be going. We had hoped to get Sister Rita Mary Harwood, who is the bishop's secretary for the whole diocese for pastoral, not planning, but what do they call pastoral ministry. And she said she would come and she was going to be here, but she got another, the bishop is so fatigued. Keep him in your prayers. Since his heart problems, he sometimes plans to do things and then has to send her to do them because he's just too fatigued to go on with it. So she's working probably 80 hours a week. So anyhow, we got together and we said, well, we'd rather have Katherine Thielen anyhow. Because Katherine can bring, Sister Rita Mary would have brought something from the administration of the diocese, but Katherine can bring something from the university, and that's where we are. Universities could have a tremendous role to play. This university, along with Notre Dame College and Ursuline College and our Newman ministries throughout the diocese, could have a tremendous, tremendous role. And in fact, I think we're going to find out they're already doing it. They're, like Sister Luke Tobin said, they're not waiting. Okay, they're not waiting. They know that we are the church. So we hope we'll have 2 more of these 20-minute presentations, and then I think that was 25 minutes. And then we hope to have some time afterwards to come up where people can come up to the mic and make some suggestions and get some input and see where we are. Okay, thanks. And this is Luke.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here. So, Father Bob and I really didn't rehearse this all that well, as some of you know him very well. You just have to kind of follow him, and he'll get you somewhere. Usually it's the right spot. In February of last year, there was a front page article that appeared in our local newspaper, and you've seen these articles over the years. And the headline of the article was, "Priest shortage is predicted. And then it goes through a lot of statistics and talks about, doom and gloom, and over and over and over, these articles appear. And usually what I've learned is the news media seems to have a tendency of producing articles right at the beginning of Lent. I think to get us excited. And so they talked about the priest shortage, and as they talked about it, just kind of regurgitated what they've been saying for many, many years about the trajectory of priests and the shortage. Father Bob mentioned that the Center for Applied Research of the Apostolate, or it's oftentimes referred to as CARA, was engaged by the diocese back in 2015. And they studied the demographics, they studied all the data points, and then presented a report back to the bishop, and the bishop then presented it to the convocation in October of 2015. And as the priests looked at the information, they were given some questions and tabletop discussion, and basically the question was, does this surprise you? And they answered no. Does this concern you? And the answer was yes. And that has just continued. And while the Presbyteral Council then studied this and asked the bishop, well, what's going to happen? And at the convocation in 2015, the bishop said, we will begin studying this, looking at it, and come back in 2016 at the three-day convocation and update you on some things we've learned. Well, for the past year or so, I've been studying this with a number of priests, a number of lay people, a few deacons. And in all due respect to priests, when I first got involved with this, I had been working with Father Michael Gurnick and Father Don Alexiak. And we were going to meet with the bishop right after the first of the year, and at that point, the day we were supposed to meet with him, he had fallen ill. And when he came back from his medical leave, he was back about 2 days, and we met with him. And I had prepared an outline, a proposed approach to begin looking at this with the idea of looking long-term. And what does the Diocese of Cleveland look like 2030 and 40 and beyond? And how do we prepare to serve those throughout the diocese? And what I proposed to him was an approach that is a little different. And I've studied dioceses across the country. I've worked with a number of bishops. And the old model had historically been priest-centric approach to everything, particularly planning. And I proposed to Bishop Lennon that we do not use a priest-centric approach to the strategic planning and looking at the vision of the future of the diocese. And after great consideration and conversation, he agreed. And the reason I proposed that was when you look only from a priest-centric perspective, you miss many of the things that Father Bob just talked about. You miss the opportunities, you miss experiencing all the wonderful things that happen throughout the diocese, because you're always just fixated on the number and not getting enough people into a vocation as quickly as you'd want. And you miss great, great opportunities. So what I proposed to the bishop was this, that it's not a priest-centric approach. Whether we begin looking at the vision of the future of the diocese or not, there are some very critical drivers that will push us in various directions. And if we're not prepared, it will push us in directions that we're not prepared to serve the poor and to others in the diocese. And those drivers are population. Those drivers are demographics. Those drivers are the number of Catholics in the diocese, the number of Catholics that participate and attend Mass. Those who are Catholic, the new normal is go to Mass once every 3 or 4 weeks. Those who marry someone who's not Catholic, and if they choose to practice their faith, what faith do they practice? It's the infrastructure and the buildings that we have. And it's other things that begin to drive what happens. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of background of this so we all have a good starting point. As we look at the demographics of the diocese, in population. The population in Carroll have projected of the 8-county diocese, we're about 2.7, 2.8 million. And by 2030, moving towards 2040, there's a net loss in total population of about 50,000. For planning purposes, we look at it as a rounding error. Whether it's 50,000 plus or minus, it's really insignificant. We are not a diocese that's going to grow to 3.5 million people. Just not. We're not like Austin, Texas, or down in Nashville, where I've been in conversation with the diocese there, where they're having net gains per week of over 100 people moving into the city. That's not where we're at. So when we look at the big picture, it's about 2.7, 2.8 million people, somewhere in that range. What we know is over the course of the next 14 plus years, the number of Catholics actually will decline by 140,000. We lose about 10,000 Catholics a year. And so what we all of a sudden begin to look at is population is pretty flat. The number of Catholics will decline. The demographic of the diocese is much older than many parts of the country. And so when I'm 65, 25% of the people in Cuyahoga County will be 65 years of age or older. And so we have a much older demographic. And these are very important factors when you begin thinking about what does the system, delivery system, how do we serve the people of a diocese? Because when we look at the diocese, we look at 190 zip codes, not just suburban parishes or west or east or south. You've got to be able to look at the diocese because of the great, wonderful diversity of this diocese. And as you travel, you learn a great deal about the diversity of the diocese and the wonderful people. And so as we look at the number of people in population and number of Catholics, we're about 682,000. 682,000 Catholics. And what we will do is we'll trend down to, by 2030, about 546,000. So what we have is, we have a diocese that is, from a people perspective, different than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. When the system was built, it was built on, 800, 900,000 Catholics. And that's not where we're at. And oftentimes, when we have articles, when it talks about priest shortage, they only have half of the formula. They never speak about the other half of the formula. And that is some of the demographics, some of the population, some of the other things that are very, very important. And so, as we have started in the quiet phase of just getting our arms around this process and talking to, priests and others, and most importantly, the laity, we begin to look at these factors and these drivers and how they shape the diocese, how they call us to service, how we best service, how we best serve them. It's a paradigm shift, right? But most of us get stuck in the paradigm of yesteryear. I give a talk to priests, and every time I get into this, they want to throw me out of the room, and then it sets in. Parishioners are my grandparents. Parishioners of the past were obedient, disciplined, supportive. They built churches, they supported churches, they had the bake sales and all the other things to support the parish. And they never thought about stepping outside the boundary of the parish. They had loyalty to that parish. Today, we don't have parishioners. We have clients. We have clients. They will pick up and move for a bad homily, poor music, no ministry. Very, very quickly. And so it changes the paradigm. We can't sit back and say, wait a minute, you're not allowed to join another parish outside of the parish boundaries in which you live. Those days are long gone. They make no sense whatsoever. And so what we have are people that are very mobile. We have people today that actually go to several different churches. We have a number of people who will go to a suburban parish, but also belong to an urban parish and get involved in food programs, pantry programs, services, and do wonderful things. And so in the Diocese of Cleveland, there are actually wonderful things that are happening each and every day that never get reported because the story's always focused on priest shortage. And it's priest-centric. So the opportunity we have is look beyond that, in all due respect to priests, because we're going to have priests, right? But when you start looking at the demographics and you begin looking at the paradigm, if we had 100 more priests, it wouldn't change things. Population flat. Number of Catholics declining. The number of people age increasing. You know, in the Diocese of Cleveland, we have about 175,000 people per week attending Mass. Have you read about that lately? No, you won't read about it. We have about 175,000 people attending Mass. You know, we have, in the last, year in and year out, we have, 7,000 people that we bury from church. The baptisms that we have, we baptize about 150 infants per week in the Diocese of Cleveland. We marry sacramentally over 2,200 couples per year, or we witness, I should say, over 2,200 couples per year. Our confirmation and confirmandi numbers are increasing. But we never hear about that. Because we're oftentimes stuck on priest-centric approach, or the way it used to be. And it's not going to be the way it used to be. And so as we begin looking at this, and we begin thinking about how do we begin serving the people of the diocese? And what's the infrastructure? And how does that change? And how do we begin looking at serving from a different type of infrastructure? Conceivably, we could end up building several churches over the next 20 years or so. Different locations. As we look at the mobility of people today, and as we look as people shifting and moving from urban areas of Cleveland or other urban areas throughout the diocese to second, third-rank suburbs into the rural areas, it's not as if the church has chased people away. Right? People are very mobile. People move. And what we need to do is adjust ourselves based upon that. I said 190 zip codes. There's not, I don't think, from everything that I've learned this past year, anything that is suggested from anyone in the diocese that we abandon. If anything, we need to go back and repurpose some things that we have done in the past. If we look at the demands that are occurring throughout the diocese today, and I'll just use one topic, the opiate epidemic in the Diocese of Cleveland. It's affecting maybe half of the people in this room, know somebody. The poor today, as I spend time at Bishop Cosgrove Center, the poor, the homeless, it's not the fellow who's probably had too many drinks and has been living on the streets and who's 30, 40, or 50. It's a woman who has an infant that's 2 or 3 months old. That's the poor that we're seeing on the streets. And so as we begin looking at how we address this, we've got to include everything as we begin in a very thoughtful way to plan for the future of our diocese. We've got to be able to look at these structures in which we have parishes with schools, parishes without schools, parishes that are sharing or through a partnership agreement, they share a school. We've got to begin looking at this infrastructure and be able to look at how we go back into certain areas and to provide services to all 190 zip codes. And as we look at how we do it, we've got to begin looking at the human capital side of it. We've got to look at the number of priests, deacons, certified lay ecclesial ministers, but most importantly, we have to look at how to invite, encourage, and engage the laity. It is utmost important. And so as we look at this, Father Bob had mentioned something in his remarks about mission. I'm a big proponent that I believe we're the modern day version of the Acts of the Apostles. I believe it. As baptized Christians, we are called to be Christ-like. We're called to be that light, to move forward. It's not maybe, it's absolutely clear. When we're anointed at baptism with chrism on our forehead, we're anointed as Jesus Christ was anointed, priest, prophet, and king. To be that body of Christ. To be able to go into the world, to be Christ-like. That's what we're called to do. And when we look at the Acts of the Apostles, in the 5 sections of the Acts of the Apostles, each one of them has the word mission. And so we're called for the mission of the church. We're called to be of service. We're called to be mission-minded to all people, not just some people. And it's important to think about that. And as we begin looking at this, what will take shape of the diocese in the future will be, it'll look different, but we'll be serving more. And what I think about, what I've learned, is the amount of service that's being done each and every day. Give you an example. Catholic Charities, they're in the process of doing a strategic plan. And they're calling it redesign. And they're using a methodology that's agile methodology. So some of the students here who are software developers or in the technology, you're very familiar with agile development as you build software. Well, the reason the Catholic Charities has embraced that is things are changing so rapidly in those we serve, in the work of the poor, that by the time the plan's printed, you've got to change to address some of the issues that are emerging very, very rapidly. That's what we're about. And we think about the units of service. We think about all the parishes in the diocese that partner up with inner city parishes or partner up with other nonprofit organizations or community service organizations. Wonderful things are being done. But again, when the story's written or talked about by the media, it's priest shortage. And there's nothing farther from the truth. I'll give you an example. We've looked at, and oftentimes those who do projections, they have what's called a metrics that they use, and they have number of priests versus number of Catholics. And so the Diocese of Cleveland is 2,700 Catholics to 1 priest. Now, in the diocese, our participation rate is about 20%. Registered Catholics go to church, 20%. So for the mathematicians in the room, you could say, 2,700, but if only 27%, what's the issue here? And what happens is this. The diocese actually performed fairly well based upon the number of priests that we currently have. Why? Fewer Catholics. For the last 10, 15 years, we lose 9,000 Catholics a year. And so the opportunity we have is, how do we evangelize? How do we go about encouraging people? How do we promote RCIA and other programs to introduce people to the Catholic faith? And I think it's different than what it was, I know, when I grew up at St. Joseph Collinwood Parish and went to grade school there. It's different. And we've got to be open and not feel threatened by that difference and how we approach and invite and encourage and nurture people. And so as we look at these numbers and we begin looking at cutting all the data, it still leads to the same conclusion. What we're going to see in the future of the diocese is greater collaboration, unlike anything we've ever experienced in our lives. Sometimes necessity drives innovation. It drives creativity. It gets all of the isms out of the way, and it removes our insecurities. And so what we're going to see is collaboration occurring across the diocese. Parishes will collaborate with parishes they never ever thought of they would collaborate with. We're going to collaborate with nonprofit organizations. We're going to collaborate with nonprofit organizations that are not faith-based. which we, by the way, do very well right now. And so the collaboration is going to be so important. And when we collaborate, we'll be able to serve more people and serve them in the most thoughtful way, and to serve the poor, and to serve all people. You know, what I learned is, as I travel the diocese, in the rural communities in the diocese, and there are many rural parishes, the Mass attendance rate is 60%. People drive 40, 50 minutes to go to church, and they're faithful. Easter, Christmas, it's 60%. But it's 60% they show up on Sunday and you don't see them the rest of the week. You know, if we look at some of the great things that are happening in our ethnic parishes throughout the diocese, in some of the Asian community activities, in Hispanic communities, wonderful things are actually happening when we get out of the way and let it happen, and let that collaboration take place where people are coming together. And so in addition to collaboration, the other thing that will be very prominent will be shared services. Not in a negative way, but in a positive way. Not to say let's cut and reduce, but in a very, very positive way, and looking at shared services. So I'm going to go back to my example in the rural community. What I learned in traveling and talking to the pastors and others in the rural community is this. They may need someone to teach an RCIA program. And they have people that want to be an RCIA, but they don't have anyone to teach the program. 15 minutes away, a parish in the outlying suburbs has a bunch of people that have nothing to do because they want to be engaged in teaching RCIA, but they already have an RCIA program in place, so, you know, we're all good and there's no way for you to participate. And so when I look at the future of the diocese, what we're going to be doing is linking and connecting all the resources. And if we looked at connecting all the resources, the intrinsic value is unbelievable. And how we can do more service and be more effective in the opportunities we have are unparalleled to some of the things that we've done in the past. But it's to be able to look at this collaboration, which is essential. Sure, there'll be parishes in which there'll be 2 or 3 come together and there'll be one priest. There'll be administrators. But here's the most important thing. As we look at the future of the diocese, the laity will play a very, very critical role. And for the young people, I'm going to let you in on a little insight. The Diocese of Cleveland, like many throughout the country, the number of people that are going to retire in the future in a turnover, parish councils, Eucharistic ministers, diocesan offices, are beyond significant. The opportunity for young people to step forward is unprecedented. What we have to do is open up the doors wider and be more invitational, listen to you, encourage you, and make it real clear there's a place for you at the table. But you have to do your part of it, because some of us are stuck in old school models. So you got to help us out. You know, you got to help us out. It's got to be a two-way street where you say to us, look, this is what we want to do. This is how we can be helpful. And to be actively engaged in your faith, because you are the next generation. Now, we think about the young people here, the students, you know, look around. Some of us won't be here in 20 years. Right? It's the opportunity now, not to wait, but now, to get involved in your faith. There's a very important document. And if you have never heard of this, everyone here, it's worth Googling this to find this document. Okay? This is a Vatican II document. November 1965. Right? November of 1965. So, you know, church documents have a tendency of being a little old and dated. This was a Vatican II document, and the title of the document is Decree on the Apostolate of Lay People. Now, if you ever doubted the work of the Holy Spirit, okay? So some of my young friends here, let me just kind of put it in the context. The seminaries were full, lots of priests, lots of brothers, lots of sisters. Everything's great. You can sit back and relax. Things are in good shape. They're banging on the door to come into the seminaries and to join religious life. The numbers are just absolutely off the charts. And what happens in that council is they start talking about the laity. Now, back in those days, you know, the laity was parishioner, okay? And you do what I tell you. And what the council came up with is this document. And here's what it says in the document. And I'm just going to read 2 short sentences. The church can never be without the lay apostolate. It is something that derives from the lay person's very vocation as Christians. A sign of this urgent and many-faceted need is the manifest action of the Holy Spirit, making lay people nowadays increasingly aware of their responsibility and encouraging them everywhere to serve Christ and the church. Published in 1965, drafted probably in 1963, 64. The work of the Holy Spirit envisioned today. And what it envisioned is each and every one of us stepping forward and playing such an important role. In some of my studies of church and best practices, I've had the opportunity of spending time with those of the diocese who have served in El Salvador. We could take that model there and apply it here today. And the ladies play a very, very active role in the church in El Salvador. I'm at St. Basil's out in Brecksville. We have a priest who comes out every year. He has family members. His original birthplace is from India, but he is a priest in Tanzania. And this past July, he was out and does a little mission work and asked to raise some money in that. And what he said to the people, that he was asking for money for the lay institute that's being created in Tanzania. And so after Mass, he and I chatted about it. He said, well, we really don't have priests. It's the laity that do just about everything. And so the future is looking beyond priest-centric. We will have priests. There's a projection of how many priests will be ordained in over the next several years. And so there will be priests. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form we replace them. I'm not suggesting. What I am saying is the opportunity for all of us. The opportunity to look at the future. And when we look at the future of the Diocese of Cleveland, and when that plan is written, which will be over the next several years, we're in the infancy stages right now. And there'll be more of a public awareness that will occur after the first of the year. But we're in the infancy stages of this planning process. But I strongly believe that with the input of the laity, you will see a plan developed in 2018, begin implementation 2019, for full implementation 2020, which will be driven by laity participation. And that's what the Holy Spirit, in 1965, called the council members to begin thinking about. It's the laity, the work of the laity. So what we have to do is, all of us, beginning today, have to figure out ways in which we prepare ourselves. You know, to learn the church language, to learn the church teaching, but to be open in that call of service. And to be open to be able to say, you know, as a Catholic, I do certain things because I'm a Catholic. I heard a great quote that Bishop Pilla had used a number of years ago. He was being criticized. This is when he was still the ordinary of Cleveland. He was being criticized for the work being done in the city of Cleveland. And they said, Bishop, why are you spending so much money in the city of Cleveland and expending these resources, or in other parts of the diocese where they're non-Catholic? And his answer was, because we're Catholic. Think about that. How profound. Because we're Catholic. So, the future of the diocese is bright if we look at the big picture. And it's bright when we look at what we're going to do, each and every one of us. And how we maybe do things a little differently, but to recognize each and every one of us is called through a vocation and driven and guided by the Holy Spirit. Because there is no doubt, no question, we are the modern day version of the Acts of the Apostles. Thank you.
Well, I'm Sister Katherine Feely, and I work here at John Carroll, and I want to talk about the present and the future, but mostly I want to talk about signs of the times and hope. I'm going to do three things briefly and with visuals. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the call of Vatican II and what that actually looks like now, because we're seeing the reality of Vatican II present with us here. Second, some signs of the times that are the present reality and should shape any strategic planning going forward. And third, to touch on things that indicate that the future is here and the hope is active now. So that's what I want to do. And the first thing that I want to begin with is that Jesus never said, "Count my sheep." He said, "Feed them." So I want to talk about university students and a future full of hope. Because at John Carroll, part of what's happening here is part of what's happening at Notre Dame College, at Ursuline, at all kinds of other institutions of higher ed, where service learning is a place where students are discovering their own gifts and talents that this world urgently needs. And by using those gifts and developing those talents, they are the face of the church of the future and the present. And so what are we doing? And so this is going to bring us into like a reality check right here. So here are some things that are happening. In light of Vatican II, students today, families today, individuals of all stripes are discovering that they are engaged in very significant ways and don't need necessarily to be invited in because they are in. And so as we pursue academic excellence, that's one of the ways that we bring our gifts to a world that needs them. We engage in reflection as a way of listening and tuning into the Spirit. That call to discernment is a call of Vatican II. What is God doing in the density of the present as we're confronted with it now? What does it mean? How does it break your heart? What does suffering do to you? When your friend is grieving, what words are any good, as Bob mentioned? So how do we make sense of a world in crisis and a world in need and a world of hope? How do we discover meaning? I know day after day, encounter after encounter, that this generation of students that we have the privilege of working with here at John Carroll are amazing. And their hunger for meaning is profound. And they're going to challenge assumptions. They're going to challenge assumptions like they need a parish to belong to. They don't. Why? Because they're doing all the things a church does by leaving the pews and finding community. And it looks different, but the faith foundation and the hunger and the God that's beneath it all is the same. And that's okay. Part of our work at the university and part of the opportunity is it's this opportunity to engage and promote civic responsibility. Another key word of Vatican II, responsibility and collegiality. And it should be shared. And it should be mutual. And we need a little more institutional humility to see that it's together on one level and not a hierarchy that can be mediated. The goal of engagement is to foster solidarity. What does it mean when one human experience is listened to and encountered and reverenced by another person who's listening and encountering and reverencing? Profound transformation happens. The church is alive in every single encounter where that takes place. It is sacramental and holy in the small s sacrament. And it happens daily. And so we try to help our students discover that and see it and appreciate it and promote justice in the process. Ask those deeper questions. Why are we seeing hunger and homelessness in the 21st century in the richest nation on the planet? Why? What are the structural causes? What are the obstacles to human flourishing? Why can't we all thrive? Why is some education more privileged than others based on property tax? What do we do about this? This is our country and our democracy. And how do we help students discover that the world needs the gifts only they have? Their particular gifts, they're unique and unrepeatable. And so the career path matters, because someone who's called to be a mathematician is different from someone else who's called to be an accountant. The world needs both. The world needs physicians and healers and environmental scientists and biologists and everything else. But each of us have different gifts and talents that are uniquely ours that must be discovered and engaged and used. And so this thing that I'm talking about, one of the ways that we're seeing this unfold in light of Vatican II is really looking at service learning, and the hyphen in that title is critical. And so this is one way this generation of students is invited into really seeing firsthand what's happening. How does theory in the academic world meet reality on the streets and in the cities and in the clinics and in the hospitals, in the social service centers, in the schools? And how does it connect us to that deeper Catholic mission? How is the call of the gospel alive and well in the young people today? And they're responding to it in different ways. And maybe through mobile devices, but they're connected, they're LinkedIn, they're Facebooked, they're tweeting about it, they're hungering for meaning, and they're making a difference. So take a look at this. This is a sign of the times from this generation of students. When Father Niehoff first came to the university in 2006, he issued a mandate to us and wanted to see service really enlivened and deepened at the university as a hallmark of the Jesuit mission. And so over the past 8 years, you can see that a culture of service has become what's expected of a John Carroll student. But it is not service for the sake of service. It's service for the sake of discovery, for vocation, for justice, for hope, for engagement. And so you might see numbers on the screen, but these are stories, these are faces, these are people, these are lives. And these encounters, this is a picture of transformation really, because what happens in those encounters changes our students and changes us. So where are we? When we look at Vatican II and the call to Vatican II as a new image, this understanding of the notion of the people of God was a new vision, and we're seeing it realized in lots of ways. So the university is the yellow cross to the right, but these are the many places where our students serve and listen to the cries of the poor and the hungry and the homeless and the imprisoned. And this is where we see hope restored, perhaps, where we see suffering shared, where we see joys multiplied and griefs divided. And as we look at these partners, collaboration isn't just something to happen in the future, it's happening now. And the agencies that our students work with, and the educational institutions and Catholic Charities agencies, social workplaces, hospitals, clinics, the neighborhoods where our students are, it's changing our students, it's changing our faculty, it's changing our staff, and I can sure tell you it's changing me. When I hear the stories, when I read the reflections of our students, when I hear the difference they're making, things that we don't know that are happening, and all of a sudden we discover the student that was required to tutor for a service learning course has gone back every single semester since on their own to help that first grader who's now in 4th grade. It's extraordinary. And so here you see some of the places where we set the prisoner free, where we feed the hungry and clothe the naked and so forth. And so here are some hallmarks of this generation. And though this is true of John Carroll students, this is true of this generation beyond John Carroll. And so here are some of the things. We know that they're hungry for meaning and purpose. And the church, the people of God, needs that. That our students and this generation are highly engaged and very involved, and on lots of different levels and in lots of different networks, and not just one place. That they are developing skills and competencies, and they should be engaged on parish councils today, not somewhere in the future. That they are hopeful and passionate. And that our students would probably describe themselves, and all the studies that we see can identify this, that our students are spiritual but not necessarily religious. Well, the gospel is alive and well. And what happens if the parish is the institution of the past and not the future? What if building these communities of meaning and purpose and belonging are the place of the future? What if the church has left the building? I don't think Jesus would mind. He never built a church in his day, to my knowledge. And how do we understand that our students are in the community, living the gospel, though we may not see them in the pews? Well, aren't they doing the very thing that we've been asking? And I can tell you that our students are very interested in urban issues, in the challenges facing the city of Cleveland and beyond, in the needs and challenges that they see in the sites that they serve in ecological justice, in human rights, in building peace, in saving the earth. And so it's extraordinary to see what is happening with this generation who are the present and the future. And this is just one visualization of where our students are in terms of impact in the hours that they serve in the community. And if I were to overlay this with where the census tracts correlate the highest aspects of poverty, you see our students are right there, where the cry of the poor is the loudest. Last year, just a few quick things. Over 1,300 students took an academic service learning course where the content in the classroom was matched with service in the community. And the two mutually informed and transformed each other. Learning was deepened, eyes were opened, hearts were changed. 68% of our students did something in the city of Cleveland to be of service to those in need last year. It's a staggering number. And again, it's not about the number. It's not place-based. It's grace-based. 38 faculty taught over 70 of these courses in 17 different disciplines. Everything from business and management skills to health and poverty. And this is a sign of hope. This is a sign of the times. These are students who are engaged, who find faith in the most unlikely places, and who are open to whatever is happening within them by paying attention to the world around them. And so as I close in terms of talking about a future full of hope, in any pastoral planning effort, there needs to be wide and inclusive, transparent participation in such processes. Data, as we know, is not enough. It's not about statistics, but about relationships. It's about mutually informing one another with what we see. But more than that, it's really about what is the Spirit inviting? We can do all the strategic planning, but where is God inviting us to engage now? And how do we understand that these needs and challenges are signs of God's grace inviting us to something more? And we have what we need to address them. We simply have to listen more deeply. It's a contemplative stance, not an actuarial one. And so discernment is as important as information. And Sister Constance Fitzgerald, who's a Carmelite from Baltimore, gave an address in 2009 to the Catholic Theological Society of America. And if you'll just indulge me to read this quote of hers, she raises something very significant as we engage this question of what does the future hold. And she says this: deeper communal contemplation are needed at a time when polarization, suspicion, denouncement, investigation, silencing, alienation, anger, cynicism, and sadness divide our church and our country. And when our news headlines continue to be marked by wrongdoing and greed, our earth is menaced with global warming and ecological distress that threatens all planetary life with eventual extinction. The religions of the world are plagued with extremism, and age-old distrust fuels war and terrorism. The people of the world are abused with violence and slavery and deprivation too great to measure. Yet we have hope. We may be encumbered by old assumptions. We must be freed from the burden of memories that limit our horizons and therefore make us unfree to see God coming to us from the future. We must not be slow to deal with different levels of complexity and to engage a deeper consciousness of God's choosing. We must be hospitable to ambiguity before the holy mystery of our lives, of the church, and of an impasse that we may not see our way forward. We must continue to be radically open to contemplative grace and purification that only God can provide. These alone transform the future. And I think as I listened to Connie, that consciousness piece is a critical understanding as we look at the way forward. That old solutions and old ways of doing things are not enough for the future. They can't get us there. They're limited and finite. And God is much bigger than that. And lastly, I would just like to close with something that Bob highlighted in terms of Pope Francis, in terms of that missionary understanding of the Pilgrim Church on mission in history. And Karl Rahner had said in his theology that God's salvation is a salvation of history and in history. So that means that today's reality is filled with the presence of God. Not waiting for us in the future, but here and present and active, even in reality and hard realities. The burden and the density of the present reveals God's goodness, God's grace, God's infinite love, the Spirit moving and acting within us. And here's what the Pope has said about this missionary understanding. I dream of a missionary option, that is, a missionary impulse capable of transforming everything, so that the church's customs, ways of doing things, times and schedules, language and structures can be suitably challenged and changed for an evangelization of today's world rather than for yesterday's. It is not about her self-preservation. The renewal of church structures must be focused on mission, on the gospel, on bringing hope, making pastoral activity on every level more inclusive, more open, more transparent, and to open up space where inspiration and the Spirit's guidance elicit fearlessness and a positive response, so that the renewal of the church is its only option, and it does not fall prey to a kind of ecclesial introversion. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you. And I want to challenge us to think about the future is in us now. And what it looks like, we don't need to fear. We simply need to be open and radically attuned to what God's Spirit is asking and inviting in what is moving in us and through us as we listen to each other and to God. Thank you.
She's the only one that did 20 minutes. So, anybody has comments, want to come up for speak, or?
One comment I'd make is I suggest maybe one thing we should do is make Sister the rector of the seminary. Or at least ask ourselves, honestly, I know we're not going to have a priest-centered church, and maybe there will be fewer Catholics around, but if we're going to be a church that's centered around the Eucharist as the source and summit of our life so that we can go out and be of service, then we have to think about not just how many priests we're ordaining, which is a good point, but also we ask ourselves, how are we training priests and who are we allowing to answer that call? Because I wonder if in the increasingly diverse world of the 21st century, the fact is our clergy, even our younger clergy, seem to look an awful lot alike. And I'm just wondering how we can plan for that in the future and whether or not the diocese will be taking that into consideration as it plans, recognizing that the diocese doesn't have complete freedom in that, you know. But the kind of formation that Sister's engaging in with students here, effectively it transforms them into missionary apostles doing that work, and that's what we need more of. So how free are we to transform how we train people for mission and for ministry in order to better serve the church and the people in the 21st century?
Do some of the seminarians take classes here?
Yes.
I think they do, so that probably would be, yeah, not impossible to do. That's great. Are you noting these things, Lou? This is input. Anybody else have anything you want to put into their strategic plan? I mean, ideas are, out of the box, ideas are the best. Yes.
The reference in the pews and in the streets.
Louder, please.
They have to go together. And then you have to start in the pews to get the motivation and everything to take you into the streets. And I don't want to see those like they're two separate entities. They're two things I think have to work together. But the church starts within the pews, and the motivation to get into the streets comes from the church. And that's where I think Dr. Murphy is referencing the fact of the priest getting the people out of the pews from that Sunday Mass and out to do something active.
So what you're saying is if you come out of the pews, that's where you're going to get the motivation to come out. It's interesting, except there are other people, very interesting, and I know a lot of them, who act themselves into a way of thinking. They start by responding to the need. Somebody's hungry, I'm going to feed them. Somebody's homeless, I'm going to take sandwiches to them under the bridge, and it brings them to the pews eventually, or somewhere. But it's yeah, it's a good place to start. Jim?
I belonged to St. Pascal's for 63 years, and we had a priest there, Father Tom Smithson, who was a late vocation, and he was on fire with the gospel. And he was transferred to Chicago, and the cardinal in Chicago gave him 3 parishes to unite as one. So he had 3 churches, 3 schools, 3 convents, 3 rectories. And he said, I became a landlord. And I was told to get these buildings ready to sell. He said, I couldn't do what I wanted to do spiritually for the people. And it was draining him. And I contrast that with Father Bob's St. Coleman's. Looking through the Catholic directory, let's say there was 150 parishes, they were listed 150 pastors, but not at St. Coleman's. Father Bob was listed as sacramental minister. And 2 sisters of St. Joseph, Sister Carroll and Sister Lucy, were assigned there by Bishop Hilla. And I heard Bishop Hilla say the smartest decision he ever made was sending those 2 nuns there to administer the parish. And Father Bob was able to be there sacramentally. And one of the things that he realizes is that service is a sacrament. And another thing about that parish, they had a community meal, which was an extension of the Eucharist. And they were nourishing people, spiritually and physically. Deacon Lewis from St. Basil's, it's a suburban parish, but they have a care for the people, the poor, and the people in the city. They have a sister parish in Latin America, a sister parish in Jordan, and they send teams of people over there 2 or 3 times a year to help the people spiritually, physically, financially.
Years ago, they had a sister parish in Mount Pleasant, St. Catherine's. Father Jenny was at both parishes, which is very interesting too. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. That's good. Speak.
There is a terrible disconnect between Vatican II and the sin of clericalism, which is prevalent too often. A lot of us who are older were brought up to be obedient, keep our mouths shut. Don't go to a Protestant church, you'll go to hell. Don't participate in a marriage of a family member, in a mixed marriage, because it's sinful. And there is so much carryover with older people today. By contrast, those of you that remember Jim Skirl, who was a religion teacher at Ignatius, and encouraged his students to do a number of things: feeding the poor, being pallbearers for those who had nobody at their funeral, and on and on and on.
They're still doing that too.
And by contrast, we have a tremendous amount of examples of mismanagement in hierarchy, like the mistreatment of Father Lenning, or the mishandling of St. Peter's Church for an entire congregation and their pastor. And so we are at a situation where, what do we do because of the way we were brought up and taught? Keep quiet, don't say anything. And the needs of people. And there are people that are, I'm glad to see the young people that are not shackled by a lot of the things that we older ones are. That is very encouraging.
One of the
What is discouraging is that there is a total lack of collegiality, like in our diocese, and a refusal to listen to fellow clergy or the lay people. And that is a problem that I have seen, and I have witnessed in many different ways. And it's a challenge to us, the older people, and luckily a lot of the younger people are completely oblivious to that. But it is there. How do we overcome that?
You know, frequently people will come up to me and say, I went to the marriage in a Protestant church, or I was at a funeral in your church and I'm Lutheran and I received communion. And my usual answer is, if you go to hell, it probably won't be for that. So, because we thought we would in those days. You're absolutely right. And younger people don't even give that a second thought, which actually gives them really a lot more freedom to move around. And things change. I mean, the church evolves. Everything evolves. Our understanding of church evolves. Understanding that how we are the church evolves. And when we grew up,
the church fathers always said that.
Yeah.
The church is the living body.
Yeah, but they never told us when I wasn't a priest. Yeah.
I was just going to say, just an observation, listening to the plan, so to speak. I mean, there seems to be a certain acceptance of the fact there will be fewer priests and fewer Catholics. And I hope that's not an operating principle in the plan that's going to be developed. Because, you know, the old saying, what the mind believes, the body achieves. And so I don't know what the plan will incorporate in terms of evangelization and getting our Catholic message out to this 8-county diocese. I really think our diocese can do a much better job in using digital media and other resources to get our message out. I mean, the service that John Carroll is doing in the city, that's phenomenal. That gets the message out too. But as a diocese, I mean, I look at what goes on in like Diocese of Richmond or Milwaukee or any number of dioceses around the country, and you sense a very strong evangelical, Catholic evangelical message going out to the broad community. So I hope we're not accepting the fact there'll be fewer Catholics and fewer priests. I hope it's not an operating principle of the plan.
It's a projection based on the
Well,
way things are, but that
projections
can always
change.
change. That
Yeah.
can always change. And it's very interesting. It's those things that are happening, everything that we saw up here, that's the constitutive part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Okay. You would say, well, if they're not going to church on Sunday, this isn't the way we were raised. You go on and on. But the constitutive part is the mission, which is to bring good news to the poor, which brings divine life into people's lives, because it's love. And where love is, God is. And so you have actual hours of loving that are going on. And it's all happening. It's not the way we were programmed. But the other thing Karl Rahner said, which is very interesting, is that the Christians of the future will be mystics. And that's what's happening. When they said they're spiritual, not religious, okay? Yeah, they are searching for spirituality, and they are meditating. They're going to meditation. They're paying for meditation classes. It's amazing. It's amazing what's going on. But it is what it is to be. That is what it means to be the church, really, and not to be part of the institutional organization, whatever. That's important, and it's important insofar as it enables us to be church, or insofar as it helps with the linking and all of the things that we want to do. But we must never lose sight of the mission.
Can I ask you a question, Father? This is a quote that comes from Katherine of the Church. The church is a visible society of baptized Christians professing the same faith under the authority of the invisible head, Jesus, and the authority of the visible head, Pope. I didn't have one sense this evening that the church meant that. I had a profound sense that it meant to be a social worker. Group of people.
Yeah, okay.
And have some feeling of hope. Certainly not to be religious.
No, and there's no question about that, and that's why we need priests, because it is where the sacraments are found, etc. But what's happened today, and we need to think about this, is those sacraments were never properly explained to the generation that is now in college and high school. And they do not understand, Bill was saying, the Eucharist-centered church is what we ought to be, but they don't understand the meaning of the Eucharist as that. They see it as a ritual performance of a religious rite, and so it's a little different. So no, what the Catechism says is true, but it's not complete,
I'm so glad.
because it doesn't talk so much about the mission of the church. If you look more into the Code of Canon Law, where it talks about the church as the people of God, the church as the people of God is much broader than what is described there as the visible. That's actually a definition that comes from Robert Bellarmine from the Middle Ages, and it's traditionally what the church is called, but the church is much broader than all of that.
Thank you so much for saying that. If I may just take quickly.
Yeah.
It's just one definition, by the way, that's often effective.
Yeah.
Multiple definitions are offered. as
Yeah.
well. But it does concern me, I mean, as you say, that it's not the definition that I believe I'm familiar with.
Right.
Certainly college-age students are more likely to become familiar with that definition. But as I hear and as I know of many Catholic institutions, service learning is being touted, how are they
Sister, do you want to speak to that?
I can hear that at home when I'm talking to
Say that? So why don't you go up here?
I want to thank you for your question because I think it's a beautiful one. And in 20 minutes, I couldn't say everything that's happening, but I was asked to focus on this element of students engaging. And I think the theology courses that students take here, the backgrounds that they bring, certainly we're assuming that as well. So it's not in opposition or excluded, it's part of. And so this deep understanding of a sacramental church, Father Bob spoke to that, so I was focusing on what our students are doing that is living the gospel in a different way for this generation.
My name is J.P. Gralty, and I have the pleasure of working for Sister Katherine in the Center for Service and Social Action here. And I just wanted to identify for us one place where I see signs of hope, and also a place where, in our strategic planning in the diocese, where we might want to look for, what are some assets here in this diocese. I'm a proud, graduate of one of our Year of Service programs here in the diocese, one of our Catholic Year of Service programs, that are constantly and continually well-filled with young adults coming from both locally and all over the country to come here to Cleveland to live in a Catholic community, so these are Catholic programs, and to do a year of service. And so it's these two things connected. And so these programs, the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, the Capuchin Volunteers,
Mariners, too.
Humility of Mary Volunteers, which is my program, and St. Martin de Porres High School also has their own volunteer corps. But in the Center for Service and Social Action, I actually have the pleasure of working with our community partners. And one thing I've noticed is that a lot of the people who are doing the work in some of these institutions, like people who are working at St. Martin de Porres, or Boys Hope, Girls Hope, where I just had the pleasure of going yesterday, or various Catholic charities, Migration and Refugee Services, for example, in our Catholic schools, are actually alumni of these Year of Service programs. And a lot of them are coming from elsewhere in the country, and are coming here and staying. So I have a friend who is from New Jersey and who came to Cleveland to be a Jesuit volunteer, and when her year of service was up, she stayed, and today she's still working in the Domestic Violence and Child Advocacy Center. And that's an asset. That is something that we need to lift up and to say, yes, there are passionate, faith-filled young people who are saying, I want to come here for a Catholic volunteer program to be of service. And then when that finishes, so many of them stay, and so many of them continue to work in these institutions and to bring light and to bring hope and to spread the gospel. So I just wanted to share that as something that I've seen from my vantage point.
Yeah, St. Patrick's Church practically rebuilt itself with Jesuit volunteers because some of them stayed every year, okay, over the last 20 years, and it's been very beautiful.
I think I have an answer to your question on how to get our generation. I'm a senior at John Carroll, and I grew up in a non-traditional family where I didn't go to church every Sunday. I wasn't very aware of my opportunities in my faith, and still today I don't have the opportunity to necessarily devote myself as much as I should be or wish I could be. And I think the non-central approach with priests is the best idea of getting involved with other partnerships. Look at the word church. It's a non-denominational church, but you see the congregations and the sizes of people that go there to practice their faith, and they also have recplexes, field houses that get them engaged in sports and other purposes, and then it brings them into the church. It brings them into the congregations. I saw that as I was growing up. I played soccer there, and now look at it now. It's been renovated, they're growing, they're flourishing, and it's all because of these partnerships with multiple organizations. And that's just what I've seen personally growing up.
Right here.
I just wanted to share something going back to the idea of taking what we receive at Mass and out into the world and doing service. Something that I heard really happened in a parish, not in our diocese, unfortunately, but they kept promoting that idea, and what they finally did is put signs up over every one of their exits from the church that said caution, entering work area. And I thought that was really a clever.
The world, huh? Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate that we're going to need fewer physical churches, fewer physical structures in 20 years?
I don't
So,
have an answer.
turn it on. This one, or this one.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't have a specific answer to that question about 20 years, but I think that it's, in Philadelphia, the Capuchins, under the direction of the bishop there, and a couple of the Capuchins here actually introduced me to some of this, is they went back and looked at repurposing and said, you know, sometimes to serve people, you don't have to have a big structure. Instead, they started building storefront ministries. And those become small mission houses and things of that nature. I think that there's possibilities of that. I think that everybody gets stuck on the number of churches. I think what's important is what happens inside those churches. And I think that, as I said earlier, I know there's great thought about 190 zip codes. It would be very easy to ignore and just look where the numbers take you as far as growth, and that's not part of what I've learned in the planning process at all. So I think it's, in the comments that were talked about here, the sacramental part, in the Eucharist, and all the things that we cherish in our sacramental lives are very, very important, very important. But we've got to be very open. And, so I can't give you an answer to that question, but I know that in the early stages of this conversation, it's not about closing churches. In some respects, it's much harder of what we really need to do as we look at the future.
I got one attached. Okay, well, thanks, everybody.